Okay, folks, here we are again. This is Unit 2, Section 1 and 2, all in one lecture. This will be quicker than the last one, so let's get started. And for those of you who didn't know, I'm Dr. Brian Cerny. I'm not Dr. Brian Cerny. Dr. Cerny was my father. He was a doctor, a physician. Okay, I'm a doctor, a DR, a PhD, right? PhD, piled high and deep, those people. Okay, so that does not mean that I know a lot about medicine. I know a little bit, enough to get in trouble maybe. And so um, my studies are on interpreting, which is why I'm teaching you about deafn and interpreting that. Okay, so now we got that clear. Okay, so Unit 2 talks about social linguistics, labels, and identity as a community, being within or outside of a community. So let's get started. So we have the idea of a culture, a language, and the socio-linguistics, which merge the two. You see that beautiful merge? That's a round ball with a sphere, whatever that is, popping out of it. It would be really cool if I knew how to make one. So culture and language is socio-linguistics. The point here is that where you have language, you will have culture. Where there is culture, you may have language. And it depends on whether the cultural aspects go into literature and other things. But where there is language, you for sure will have culture, and culture is more prevalent than language. Sociolinguistics says, hey, let's study what people do with language. Right? You can study language as a theoretical construction, or you can look at what real people do. So, for example, if I tell you that some people sign truck, oh my goodness, that's the letter T, and that's English. No, some deaf people sign truck. Period. That's ASL. Why is it ASL? Because the deaf people live in North America, and they use it with other deaf people who live in North America. And therefore, it is not my business to critique and tell you that that's not ASL. I might say it's not standard ASL. I might have some other label, but there's no reason to say it's English. You go up to a hearing person and sign, and they'll say, what's that sign language you're using with me, my friend? I don't understand it because it's clearly not in English. Right? Signs are never English. Signs are related to sign languages, and they may be good examples or examples of sign language, but they are never examples of English. Never, not one time, ever. No one signs English. They speak or they write. Okay, so the power of labels, and we have one important label, and that is internalized oppression. It's right over here. Okay, so the idea of some people put you down, and you say, gee, they think that I'm nothing. I must really be nothing. I accept that label. I will oppress other people like me and tell them that they're nothing too. Or they say, hey, don't use that sign language. It's dangerous. It might teach you how to communicate and learn. We want you to use English, but you can't hear it, and so we're going to force you to lip read parts of English and otherwise just miss a whole bunch of things. You ready? Get started, go. And don't use that sign language. It's bad. Oh, okay. I won't use that sign language. And this really happened. So that's when we get into section 2, which is coming real soon. So the idea of internalized oppression is that you accept the labels other people give you, these negative labels, and that you probably actively use them against other people like you to say, don't speak up against them. They have the right. We don't have the right. You have that right. Okay. Section 2. And I'm done with the PowerPoint. I don't have pictures. Boop. Whoops. Okay, so let's go over here. Wow, you can see all kinds of things that I don't really care about, but they're irrelevant. Okay, let's get this a little bit bigger here. Ha! Look at that. That was internalized impression. Look at this. This is the um, first deaf organization to be set up by deaf people to promote, right? Not to critique or to control or minimize the deaf community, but to promote deaf people being active, active and in charge of their own lives, right? So you have the New England Gallaudet Association of the Deaf, set up in 1850. Okay, and 30 years later, we're going to have the NAD set up in Ohio, but it's a national organization. But we'll get there. This is like, well, what's the history of the deaf community in America? Well, the history is not well known before 1817 when you set up a school. When you set up a school, you start to have records of what happened, who graduated, who's teaching, what's your philosophy, promotional materials, things like that. And so the American Annals of the Deaf is related to the American School for the Deaf. It's the first place to collect information related to how to teach deaf people. And it promoted deaf people. It promoted that deaf people can't learn. Here's good ways to do it. And for example, maybe sign language should be part of that plan. So the American Annals of the Deaf is still published every year. It is now handled through Gallaudet. And it's a good resource. It's not a perfect resource. It's one thing, and it's published every 3 months, I think. But it has they do a survey of schools that have deaf kids. You can see numbers. You can get data and statistics in the April edition. So maybe there's 10 editions every year. I don't think they publish through the summer. Anyway, it's not the AAD. It's the American Annals of the Deaf. Hey, there you go. That's a resource for you to look for and find interesting information. People, let's talk about Edward Minor Gallaudet, or EMG, or Edward Minor Gallaudet. And so EMG was the last child born to Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet and Sophia Fowler, who is a deaf student of the school, who later became married to the superintendent. How does that happen? Well, watch out, it's going to happen again when we see Laurent Claire marries one of his students. I don't think they married them when they were students, and I think they might have been older students anyway, like they came in when they were older. What's the point? EMG's mom is deaf. He born, grow up, deaf, sign. Okay, so he is a native signer, and he ends up establishing he didn't have the money to do it, somebody else set up the school that is now Gallaudet University. That has its own interesting history. Is this where I cover that history? Well, okay, I'm going to touch on it real quick. So we have another person. Let's find that other person. And that person is Amos Kendall. Nice looking fellow there. Where? There's Amos. He looks like he might know Andrew Jackson. Right, get a $20 bill. Look, that's Andrew Jackson. Yeah, he did know him. He was the Postmaster General, that was the title, for Andrew Jackson. And you say, so what? Who cares? Back in that time, the Postmaster General had the power to get things done in D.C. This was before you had lobbyists and power brokers and bribes to congressmen and things like that. So he was the power guy in the Jackson presidential administration. And he ran the post office. And people sued him. One person sued him because he was in charge of the post office, and the post office owed this person some money, and something happened. I don't know why he wasn't paid, but so he sues him in the Supreme Court. Now that sounds really big, fancy, and important. It was not a constitutional issue. The Supreme Court had the authority to handle things in Washington, D.C. That has changed now. There are district courts in D.C. now. But at that time, the Supreme Court handled the court business in D.C. So he was sued in the Supreme Court. He won. And the decision was that you can't hold a representative of the government responsible for the government's actions, right? Which is lucky because, well, anyway. So he had a lot of power, a lot of influence, and a lot of negative press. A lot of people did not like him. Okay? And guess what happens? He becomes friends with another person. Okay? He becomes friends with, come on, Samuel Morse. Remember I talked about Morse code before? That guy. He invented it. Okay? Now, story goes that he invented it because his wife was deaf, and so okay, you could write notes, but you're gonna tap like, and I just always imagine like can I touch you here repeatedly. Okay, so that takes a long time to communicate, but anyway, he created Morse code. More importantly, he set up telegraphs system, so you could then send information from Washington D.C. to, oh, I don't know, Baltimore, or maybe from Baltimore to the nation's capital in Washington D.C. and say something like, "What hath God wrought?" Let's just look that up. See, it shows that I didn't make it up. It's right there. What hath God wrought? Phrase from the book of Numbers. Okay, fine. And the first Morse code on May 24th. This is not in a test. This is extra color material, right? This is your color commentator for the football game. Okay, so you get to know that Morse was involved in Amos Kendall's life. Morse had a lot of money, earned a lot of money. Kendall managed that company and the money, and didn't cheat. He earned his money, but he earned a lot of money. And he was getting older in life, and he thought, a lot of people have a negative idea for my name. I want to change that. I want to give something that, goes past my life. So he had some land in Washington, D.C. He knows that Morse's wife is deaf, and he sees this person on the street. He's got some little kids with him who are deaf, it seems, and he's begging for money to set up a school and teach these kids. And he thinks, that's a good effort. I'm going to give them land, building, money, support this effort. We're going to teach deaf kids in Washington, D.C. So he gets it all set up, and the first thing that happens is the person who's begging the money takes off with it, leaves the kids with the cook. Wow, that's not a positive impression. That's not gonna be good. That's horrible. So my name is still gonna suck until I fix this problem. And so Amos Kendall says, I need to find the best person to teach deaf kids anywhere in the U.S. Who is that? So he starts asking, and they say, well, I mean, I'm busy. I'm not going to set up a school. But if you want somebody who's available and good and got the name, that would be EMG. This guy. But at the time, EMG is only 20, 18. He not have a lot of experience. He has 18 or 20 years of experience using the language, but he's young. So mom's available. So get EMG and his mom to chaperone, make sure he does the right thing, and they set up the school for the deaf kids in Washington, D.C. Um, what's the name of it here? I never remember the name. It's now Gallaudet University. It was Gallaudet College. When I started, it was Gallaudet College. It changed when I was there. And before that, it was something for the education of the deaf and dumb. Um, but I don't see it here. So it's not on the test. Actually, it might be on the test. It's in the book. Okay, but it'll be a multiple choice and you'll figure it out. Okay, so we set up the school. And we set it up in the lifetime of Abraham Lincoln. There's Lincoln's sign name, Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln is president of the U.S. and signs the charter for the college that's going to give degrees to deaf people. Why is the president of the United States involved? Remember, the Supreme Court handles the court cases in D.C.? The president is kind of like the mayor of D.C. at that time. So if something happens in D.C., you need approval. What's the government? You go through Congress, the president signs it, and you have a new street name in Washington, D.C. You have a new permit to build a post office in D.C. You have a new school in D.C. called Howard University, which is also signed by Abraham Lincoln and is a few blocks from Gallaudet and has a strong and interesting history to serve and promote the education of black people who received, they didn't have to be slaves, that was just the founding of that school around the same time. I don't remember which one's first. Look it up. Howard University. Howard University used to have white people as president, blah, 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 blah. Then they had black people as president. Gallaudet had Edward Minor Gallaudet as the first president, but he's hearing. He's deaf culture, born and raised, but hearing. And all the presidents after him are hearing, until we get to King Jordan. King was his middle name. And he was the first deaf president, and ever since then we've had deaf presidents of Gallaudet University. Okay, and we'll have a lot more about that later in the course. So, now we get to AGB. And you say, okay, Amos Kendall, Postmaster General, who cares? Oh, he had money, set up a school. Okay, fine. AGB, why? He made up the telephone, which means that deaf people can't use the phone. He was trying to create something like a hearing aid. His mother was deaf. His wife was deaf. Both of them were speech readers and speakers. Both of them had become deaf later in life. They were not born deaf. Okay, so AGB promoted strongly, must speak, speech read, no sign language allowed. EMG said, what are you talking about? Sign, learn. That's a natural way. Your wife's not even born deaf. What are you talking about? Okay. So they had their own little battles. Well, battles, not, in this corner. So A.G. Bell has a little bit of history into the deaf community, and it's the same time that we set up the National College for Deaf Mutes, I think the name, and the Volta Bureau, which Volta Electronics. It was an award that he got in France for inventing the telephone. Okay, side story, Your Honor. That we have, his wife is Maybelle Hubbard. And you say, so what? Maybelle Hubbard is deaf, and Daddy is not deaf, but he is a he's a patent attorney. So he makes sure that you have the right to earn money for that invention, that thing. Okay? Hey, and he's going to invent the phone. And he's going to have a father-in-law who, does that. and make sure that he gets the patent, because I think there were many other competitors at the same time that could have gotten the telephone, and it goes to him. Money, money, money. Volta Bureau prize money. Organization to support forcing deaf people to speak in lip read and not to use sign language. Wow. Anyway, that's the history. So, we get to the year 1880. 1880. We have two things that happened in the year 1880. First, we have the National Association of the Deaf getting set up, established in Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's got some roots to the New England Gallaudet Association of the Deaf, right? We talked about that before. And now you're having people gathering. Why was it in Cincinnati? Well, at that time, Cincinnati was one of the easier places to get to from around the country. It was in the middle of the population of the country at that time. So you had some people in Cleveland, you had some people in St. Louis, you had people in maybe, let's see, 1880, but some people in California, but we weren't a state yet, right? Google it. Okay, and then you have waterways, and so boats in Cincinnati is not too far from the Mississippi. It's on the Ohio River, so you have Pittsburgh. People can get there by boat. All up and down the Mississippi could get there. And so Cincinnati, Ohio, 1880, and we set up, hey, deaf organization run by deaf, for deaf, promote deaf, support deaf community, and blah, 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 blah. And a few months later, we have the Second International Congress for the Education of the Deaf. This is known as the Milan Conference. See, it says so right there. The Milan Conference. Guess where it happened? Milan, Italy. Okay. And so, it's the second one, though. The first one happened in Paris, France, and it was a mild little gathering. And people got the idea, hey, we can make money, get power, control. All we have to do is convince the governments that are involved, that fund these deaf schools, that we know the better way to do it. Speech reading, no sign language allowed, get rid of those deaf teachers, blah, 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 blah. And that's what they did. So they passed, they said, unanimously, but there were at least 8 votes against, that the best way to teach deaf children was the pure oral method, blah, blah, blah. And I have a video that very clearly shows the ideas, the attitudes, and the results, in England particularly. So it's so Pictures in the Mind, that video, and I will be helping you identify some of the key parts when we watch that together. So, enough for now. That set up the idea that speech only right way, sign language bad. Within 33 years, by 1913, you are seeing very few deaf schools that have deaf teachers that use sign language. The European schools almost immediately changed. The American schools were slower, but they eventually changed, and we will see that the National Association of the Deaf has a response to that in 1913. We will watch that film together too, parts of it, but it's not a film. Anyway, it's all this related stuff. Read the book. Read the book. Okay? So now what else do you need to know? So, as a result of the Milan Conference, you had this strong oppression against sign language. And you had deaf people internalizing that oppression. And they would not sign in public. They would, and the story goes that some deaf people associated sign language with the smell of urine, because the only place that they could sign was in the bathroom. And so that's the extent of, like, just fake it, nod your head, smile, and lip read as best as you can, And don't look confused. Just write notes maybe. Speak, lip read. No, that's sign language. You use sign language. We slap your hand. We tie your hands behind your back. Make you sit on your hands on your chair, or cut off a piece of your hair. Ooh, what happened to you? It was signed. Uh, I I I signed. Some of the signs in the Pittsburgh area were very interesting. That they would have signs for this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They're all done out here. They would sign Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't remember which is R or an H for Thursday. And they would sign, this is Sunday. They would sign Sunday. Sunday. They had it up here. It looked like mother to me. And I never understood. Oh, see you next mother. See you next mother. I'm not a mother. Oh, see you next Sunday. Sunday. Which is still, as many years after sign language is allowed, had internalized that sign for Sunday. It was done this way. And I remember the person who was signing that telling the story of, oh, if you got caught signing, they would cut a lock of hair off of the girl's hair. And I don't know what they did to the boys. That's oppression, and that deaf people accepted it and did it to each other. It was internalized oppression. And that brings us full circle. And see you on the next one.